Divorced Redditors, what was it that finally made you or your spouse end the marriage? Serious. I will never forget this for as long as I live. Our marriage had been on autopilot for a while, and one night we finally had a brutally honest conversation argument. She asked me, "What do you want from me?" I said, "I just want you to be with me the way I want to be with you." This is when I knew our marriage was over. She said, "Well, that's just not going to happen." That memory is so incredibly painful for me. Even now, after we've been divorced for years and I am remarried with a beautiful child, I still cry sometimes thinking about my ex. It still hurts. She called the cops on me with false accusations of abuse, and the very next day asked me if I was going to buy her a new iPhone. I got it right the second time around, but the first time, no, we didn't live together first. Big mistake. He had been able to hide his alcoholism from me even though I knew and worked closely with him for 3 years before we started dating. After we got married, I tried to put him on the lease. He was denied for having 3 DUIs and contributing to the delinquency of a minor charge. He said those were in his past and he's changed. 6 months later, I was dusting a bookcase and found a liquor bottle wedged behind some books, and upon further sleuthing found 5 more assorted bottles stashed around the apartment. We had a stocked liquor cabinet, but he wanted to hide his habit. He said he would get help. He didn't. One night he drove home drunk and shoved me against the wall when I told him how reckless that was. I called the cops. He got held overnight. I boxed his stuff and downloaded the divorce papers and told his dad to bring him to the bank after picking him up from the station so we could split the account and notarize the paperwork. He said, "Why are you overreacting to this? It's not like I hit you." And I said, "Why do you think I'm stupid enough to wait until you do?" That was that. My wife stopped loving me after our daughter died. After 4 years without sex, we knew it was dead. We had 2 great kids but were just 2 roommates raising kids together. I moved out and after 8 years apart were still good friends. Wouldn't have it any other way. Edit. Actually have to go hang out with her now. Our kids are at a swim meet. Finding 6 250 count CD cases filled with burned DVD porn and $30,000 in credit card charges racked up for various porn websites, DVD purchases, etc. I'm not against porn, but I discovered that he literally spent every waking hour that he wasn't working copying porn DVDs. 6-8 hours a day of copying porn, and he'd call in sick easily once a week to spend more time with the porn. In the middle of a divorce now, when our daughter was a little over 3 months old, he was busted for child porn. Edit. A lot of people are asking how I caught him. I didn't catch him. Law enforcement did. Apparently there were hundreds of images, videos of underage girls, as young as 7, on our computer. A lot of people are also asking me if he accidentally stumbled across it. No. You can't accidentally stumble across hundreds of images and videos and save them to your computer. A lot of people are also suggesting I was quick to divorce him since he didn't act on these impulses. I don't know if he ever acted on them. In my mind he did. The girls he watched and the videos and images are victims. He took part in exploiting them. I can't look past that. He became a totally different person after we got married. He became very controlling and manipulative. I was expected to do all the chores and make dinner every night. This after working a highly stressful 40-hour-week job. He became emotionally and verbally abusive to me. Constantly thought I was cheating on him. If I had anything other than a smile on my face at all times, I was ridiculed. Everything that happened was always my fault. He was never wrong. He was always the victim. I didn't want to go home because I didn't know if I was walking into DR, G-call or MR. Hide. Had him go to 2 different counselors and didn't make it more than 2 sessions with each because he didn't need therapy. I decided to stop it all when I started to become depressed from the constant stress. I am a normally very happy, positive person and I became a walking bunch of nerves. I couldn't get past the belief that anyone who truly loved me would never treat me like he had been. Have been divorced for 6 months now. Although I get lonely sometimes, I would still take loneliness 1,000 times over being back with him. My ex and I got married very young. I was 15 and he was 17. We were together 11 years and loved each other, but realized we weren't letting each other grow up. Staying a teenager forever isn't an option when you've got kids. It's been 5 years and we still care about each other. We've both moved on. He's a great dad. He and his fiancée are my youngest son's godparents and they are having my goddaughter in January. He decided he loved sugar and partying more than me, and routinely ignored our daughter so he could do just that. Edit. This is my highest upvoted comment. Oh dear, more than less than. She decided to stay at a friend's place for a couple of days to be closer to work while working long shifts. After a week she decided that she didn't want to be married anymore and filed for divorce. After about a month of her ignoring me, I found out through a mutual friend that she had been screwing her boss and had gotten pregnant, and that's why she left. She told me that the voices were telling her to hurt the kids. It broke me. Edit. This was after 4 years of treatment for schizophrenia. She wasn't getting better, only worse. When I got into a big fight with our 19-year-old son and punched him in the face, she understandably left me for that. Me and my son were fine like a month later. It was all because of him playing Xbox all day and not looking for a job. Everybody else in the family was working or going to school. I walked in on her with another man. I worked with special needs people, and my ex would say the nastiest, most disgusting things about special needs people to put me down and mock my career ambitions. That's when he bothered to talk to me at all. He wanted a woman that would take care of him and his needs, but he cared very little about reciprocating. I didn't want to have kids with him and have the kids think that how we were living was acceptable. She threw a pot of boiling water at me. It was thrown over our 5-year-old son. She threw it at me because I was paying more attention to my son than her. I had just gotten home from work and he asked me to play the Nintendo with him. We'll be divorced very soon. Have met with lawyers. 3 weeks ago to the day he lost it, he beat the it out of me, choked me, then pulled a gun on the eye front of our 4-year-old. The past few years he has struggled with a pain pill addiction, even going so far as to steal my medication. Once took 1/3 bottle of Percocet 10s 2 days after it was filled. I didn't know for a week because I use those planner things. Tried to get him help. He didn't want it. Became increasingly hostile and I kept thinking it would get better. But it never did, and this was the last straw. My son and I have both been diagnosed with PTSD, and I have a VPO. I also moved across the country while he was still in custody. Mommy bailed him out and then showed up at the house screaming about how I probably provoked him. I'm in a wheelchair. Anyway, yeah. Done. Over. Not asking for anything because duck him, I got this. I'll add that he lost his it because he was going through withdrawals from not having pills because I have spent the last 6 months in terrible pain. To remove the temptation from his grasp, I didn't know he was getting them from a guy at work until he was in jail and I scoured everything. His eyes are super dark brown and I could never tell if his pupils were constricted, but I trusted that he was off them. He's just a loser. And I was stupid enough to give him chances because love. Edit. A word. The final straw for me was having to beg for a disinterested hand job before bed on our 5th wedding anniversary. We became roommates instead of lovers. It worked for a while, but then she and I became really itty roommates for each other as well. She is a great mom, and she thinks I'm a great dad, but we're both really horrible as a couple. No cheating, no financial issues, just really different people that probably pulled the trigger for marriage too quickly. We both just thought it was the next step after we each graduated from college. Good news is we're both civil and care for each other, just not in a romantic capacity. My only regret is that my kids won't have a traditional 2-parent upbringing like I did. It made me respect my parents' loving 35+ year marriage a whole lot more. Husband asked for a separation last week. Our first therapy session revealed that he wanted out and fast. He says he doesn't know. I don't know. I have a stressful job and my dad died 6 months ago, so I've been a pain in the ass. Who knows? I'm still shaking my head in disbelief. Wanted to separate bills and accounts. When I do that and it negatively impacts him, he gets itty. He said things like society made me get married. You bamboozled me into marrying you. I don't know what I want, but I don't want you. Even if I left you tomorrow, I'd still love you. It's been a fun week. We got married way too quick. It was Vegas where she was from. Came back to NY, where I worked, and she did nothing at all. She left around Christmas to see family in Vegas. Came back like 3 weeks later. Then a month later, just after she interviewed for a job, she told me she was leaving and going to go to Virginia to help her worthless aunt move back to Vegas. She gets there and blows $500 in 2 days, then calls me to ask for money to put gas in her aunt's car. I said hell no, and she didn't talk to me for 2 days. I finally tell her this isn't working. We get quick Vegas divorce and she is remarried 6 months later. It took years for me to finally get to the point where I was done. The last straw was the night he drunkenly screamed at me for hours. At least 5 hours. Then, he blared itty music for another hour or so. Before finally passing out. He'd done it several times in the past. But that time, it broke me. I spent most of the next day crying. That gut-wrenching, mournful type of crying. I had a job and moved out 6 months later. It's been 4 years. I don't regret a minute. Financial issues. Dave Ramsey said it best, you can't out-earn stupid. She was unwilling to set and live by a budget. New purses and sweaters and shoes every time you turned around. I worked 4 jobs. I asked her if I should maybe get a 5th job. BTW, she had a doctorate and a student loan and would not go get a job. She still doesn't work. Easy answer, Steve. See, Steve was that guy my ex knew in high school. That guy where there was always a spark of chemistry, but the time was never right. He was the one that got away. Years later, when we'd been married for a few years, she got back in touch with some old friends and wound up going to visit those old friends, Steve included. Old sparks began to fly, and next thing you know, the missus was carrying on an affair with Steve. She left me to be with him. They were soulmates, after all. Denied their true love by 14 years of time and 2 intervening marriages. Me and my wife and Steve and his. That's the easy answer. Blame it on Steve. Truth is, I never should have got married in the first place. At least, not to her. It was doomed from the get-go and Steve was just a willing scapegoat. My daughter was crying one night. She had a bad dream, and my husband told me to stay in bed and went to her. She was not comfortable with him, so she kept crying for me. It escalated to him spanking her and screaming at her to stop crying. This woke up her brother, who started crying and got spanked as well. He then broke apart the chair in their room because he stubbed his toe on it, the one I rocked them in at night, and threatened to burn their new beds in the backyard if they didn't stop crying. They were 5 and 3. He came into our bedroom where I sat, scared and stunned, got dressed, told me to deal with it and left. It was 1 AM. I didn't see him until the next night. I have no idea where he went or what he did in that time. All I know is I started packing and making plans that day, and 9 months later I moved out. That night was the culmination of years of gaslighting me and neglecting his children. His parents told me it was the best decision I ever made. It caused him to finally become a real parent, and not having to live with his mental health issues was the best decision for me. He still struggles with the parenting, but we are doing very well now and we are amiable and focused on the best for the kids. We were together 6 years, almost totally head over heels the entire time. We loved traveling, had great conversations, had great sex, supported each other's careers, bought our dream apartment. It really was everything I grew up hoping for and thinking I wouldn't be able to ever find because I was too nerdy, unfashionable, weird. On one night in the summer of 2011, right after she turned 27, I woke up in the middle of the night and she was staring at me and sobbing. I tried to ask what was wrong, but she was crying uncontrollably, and when I tried to touch her, she recoiled like I was a dangerous animal and started screaming, "How could you? I trusted you. You disgust me." It took almost an hour to figure out what was going on. For most of it I thought maybe she suspected I'd cheated or something. Nope. She thought I was hired by the CIA to spy on her. She'd spent the last week secretly taking apart everything in our apartment looking for listening devices, and while I was sleeping had tried to remove a non-existent, obviously, GPS tracker in her thigh with a pair of scissors. She had what doctors would later tell me was a sudden schizophrenic break, with absolutely no history of mental illness beforehand. I spent the next week trying to convince her to get help, but unless you've talked to someone in the grips of a genuine delusion, it's hard to understand what it's like. Imagine someone trying to convince you that the can of soda you're drinking doesn't exist, or that you're not actually reading this on Reddit. She responded like you would. Finally she was forcibly committed to an ER when she went to work and ended up punching through her computer screen to stop it from recording her. I slept on the benches in the hospital chapel for 3 days. The psychological emergency room was truly horrifying. She was forced to wear a flimsy hospital robe, surrounded by a group of about 40 mostly male, mostly older, mostly extremely violent patients. Every patient was forced to sleep in reclining chairs in a single central room with the lights out. The first night 2 men tried to abuse her. She screamed and security eventually got there to stop things. But aside from removing those 2 people to a different unit, nothing changed. After 72 hours, she was released. The next year was the longest of my life. The worst moments came every month or so. For 1 or 2 days she'd become totally lucid and realize what was happening to her: the loss of the job she loved, the loss of her freedom, and most of all the loss of control over her own mind. The first couple times that happened she was determined to fight it. She made lists, called specialists, set up detailed plans to fix herself, but after a day or 2 she always fell apart again. After the 8th or 9th time this happened, she became suicidal. She realized that it wasn't going to get better, and thought she had nothing to live for except to forever be a burden on everyone she loved. Every time she let me talk her out of killing herself, and every time it looked like I was crushing her last tiny bit of hope. Somehow, things got worse. About a year after the first diagnosis she finally refused all help and stopped taking her meds entirely. She wanted to give up. I tried everything: encouragement, elaborate promises of things she'd always wanted to do, flat out begging, and none of it worked. She stopped getting out of bed at all. She wouldn't talk to me for days or weeks. Sometimes she said she wanted to drive me away so she wouldn't be a burden on me, and I'd look her in the eyes and swear to her that it'd never work. But eventually it did. I think I'll hate myself for this until I die. But a year after she stopped taking her meds, and 2 years after the initial diagnosis, I left. I found a therapist who would do house calls for at least another couple years, got a second health insurance plan, and did my best to take care of all the financial and practical issues. But those were excuses to alleviate my own guilt. The reality is that I just couldn't sit in that dark apartment with someone who wasn't interested in life and who wanted to be alone with their suffering. I know none of it was her fault. I don't think I'd have had the strength to fight nearly as long as she did, but I just couldn't do it anymore. I still love her as much as I did when we started dating. I hope I wake up one day and that feeling is gone. Mostly I hope that one day I'll get a call and she'll have gotten help and they'll have found the magical combination of drugs that fix everything, and I can go back to being the guy I am in all our home videos, and that I'll finally be able to tell her how sorry I am that I didn't stick it out, and beg her to forgive me. But I don't think that's how it works. For me it was 1,000 little things, but the moment I decided I had to was when she was driving and I was in passenger seat as we went down highway. I thought about opening the door and jumping, killing myself just to get away from her. What stopped me from doing it was the fear I would survive and be stuck with her because I would be crippled. Would spend $1,200 on his car but yelled at me for spending over $40 on groceries. This ass spent thousands of dollars on his car and buying himself lunch daily. Always made more money than I did, but never got bills paid. I paid everything because if I didn't I would come home to no power or telephone. Also lots of mental abuse. I figured if I have to pay for everything anyway, I shouldn't have to deal with the mental abuse. He has been gone 3 years and my mortgage is 2 months ahead and my phone and power constantly have a credit on the next month. She came up with a different excuse every time I asked her. She refused marriage counseling. She refused to talk in depth about it. They ranged from the reasonable to the petty. So, I don't know. I'm going with she felt like she was too young and missing out on her party girl years. She could have figured that out earlier in our 8-year relationship so I could have gotten some time back. It wasn't the cheating 3 years after our wedding or even the $60,000 in debt she racked up. The final straw for me was when she put our older daughter's head through drywall during a manic rage. I carried my older daughter, 4 days short of 4 years old, on my shoulder with one arm while pushing the little one, then 6 months old, in a stroller, and in that 3 blocks, vowed to myself it was over, and it was. Mine's on life support, married almost 12 years. 1 kid, and I found out back in May she had been cheating on me since October 2014. We've talked on the phone, I'm working away from home, and decided we want to try to make it work. I'm going home for 2 weeks next week, so hopefully we will figure something out. Dead bedroom, and none of us had any idea how to end it. 6 became so awkward that we both avoided it. She had gained 15 kilograms and I really had no sexual interest in her anymore. Well, my wife wanted an open marriage. She has had multiple boyfriends, sexual partners. As soon as I try to partake in the open marriage, with her knowing all about it, she flips out. Turns out the open marriage was only supposed to work one way. Marries twice, both cheated on me while I was deployed to Iraq. Divorced twice. I got married at 19. Was divorced 2 days after my 22nd birthday. He had cheated on me twice and blamed it on weight gain and me not having a job. I had gained about 10 pounds and we lived in a very small town where I couldn't find a job, despite all of my efforts. So we moved back to my hometown. He found a job. I found a job. But by then we were so broken he just woke up one day, called me while I was at work, and told me he was leaving me. Day after Valentine's Day. She left me for her manager. 1st of May. She slept with him sometime in late April. My state has a mandatory separation period, so November will be when the divorce can be finalized. Just found out recently she's 10 weeks pregnant with his kid. She's always had bipolar disorder, but I thought we had finally found a therapist who had a good mix of drugs and counseling. We married sort of young, when I was 21 and she was 22. I think what finally drove her to another man was that we had an argument in February about having kids. She basically said that if we hadn't had any by the time she was 30, we'll turn 28 in December, that she wasn't going to try to have any. The argument stemmed from the fact that one of our friends, who is in med school, got pregnant, and I was still making us wait until she had paid off her prodigious debt that I wasn't aware of before the marriage. We sat down and laid out a financial plan to put us in a place to start having kids next year, but I guess that wasn't soon enough for her. She had psychiatric problems that were getting worse. She was in and out of the psych ward. She wasn't outright crazy most of the time. It was mostly just depression dotted with mildly psychotic episodes. Being around her was just really starting to weigh on me since there was nothing I could do. She was gaining weight and I found her less and less attractive. Eventually I said some really itty things, venting because I couldn't talk to her lest I just make her more depressed, on a forum like this, and she found it. Well, that was pretty much it. There was no taking back what I said. Wife married for a visa. Asked me for a divorce the day after we got married, which was rushed through at her insistence. Also lied about taking the pill, which explains why she always pushed for 6. Put up with her for another 5 years to take care of my son born thereafter. Continuously abused by her and the stepson. Finally gave up and moved overseas. We got married really young. Stupid. He violated probation having a firearm and went to prison. While in prison he tatted his face. So yeah, straight A college football player turns to gangster. Boo. Sugar is a hell of a drug. I was tired of the merry-go-round that became our relationship. He would lie about something. The big one was buying a Dodge Viper while we were in the process of getting our home repaired. Then he would promise to change or not lie again. Things would change for a short time and then he would lie again. We were living in spectred states due to him being in the Navy. He could not handle the distance and would sabotage our relationship. He refused to partake in the divorce, which ended up requiring me subpoena the government to get his records. And to this day he refuses to talk to his family or acknowledge anything has happened. It has been 3 years. When he flipped the coffee table across the room with all the baby's toys on it. That was in 1987 and I have never regretted that decision. He can abuse me but not my son. I finally realized I was dealing with problems only a parent raising a child should have to deal with. When I asked for time apart, she suddenly became the most self-reliant crazy lady I've seen in my life up until that point. At that point I knew I was a convenient fixture in her life and I was worse off for it. I caught her cheating, wanted to forgive and move on. We went to counseling, but she started acting suspicious a few weeks later. Turns out she was in some sort of subdom relationship with both her boss and her boss's mistress. I'm still not 100% sure, to be honest. My inability to open up emotionally was probably a big part. The anger that resulted from work stress, her mental problems, really probably death by 1000 cuts is the most accurate answer. When I came to the realization that if my child ended up in a relationship like my marriage because she thought that's how married people treated each other, I'd never forgive myself.